So it's now 11 o'clock. I just want to get started. The rabbi, unfortunately, fortunately, his niece is getting married. Unfortunately for us, he's not here to participate in our Sunday Zoom. So I have the opportunity to thank Louis Perlman. Louis Perlman is a member of Fifth Avenue Synagogue. He's also our neighbor during construction. He's been a very cooperative neighbor. And more importantly, he's made some very valuable introductions to the Fifth Avenue Synagogue to enhance our Sunday Zoom programming, which will transcend into some Friday night dinners and events in the new building when Thaddeus is back. But I wanted to publicly thank Louis for today's introduction and his participation in today's Zoom. And I'm going to hand the webinar over to Louis to make the introduction of today's program. Louis?
Well, all I can say is that it's really a great pleasure to introduce Thaddeus. I think we go back nearly 15 years. And I think over that time, I think we've become good friends. And in many ways, he's had quite an influence on me, although perhaps he doesn't even realize it. I always enjoyed very much our conversations and the meetings we've had all over the world, really, in a way. All the various exhibitions that he has helped in museums and curated and so on. And then, of course, all the art fairs, the Frieze and the Basels and so forth. Thaddeus, of course, is well known, very well known in the art industry. I think he represents some of the perhaps best known artists. I think there are something like 60 of them, ranging from Vadova, Kiefer, Herring, Mapplethorpe, Baselitz. I mean, these are all household names in terms of art and the collections that people have. So it's really wonderful to be able to have him on this FAS program. And of course, David, Jacob, I'd like to thank you, of course, for having him on board. And I also want to mention, while I still have the platform, that Thaddeus has been very much involved in Israel, has been very much involved in helping the Israel Museum, and has formed back about 10 years ago, formed the Austrian Friends of the Israel Museum. And every year has this wonderful program in Salzburg, which is at the beginning of the Salzburg Music Festival, at the end of July, early August. And I can only recommend all our listeners, if they're interested in music and culture and also helping the Israel Museum, that they should come to this really wonderful program at the end of July, which I personally have attended many times. I'd also like to mention today something that really impressed me, and that is Thaddeus's organization of artists in support of Ukraine, which is a wonderful effort. All the proceeds of sales by his artists on his website will be sent to help Ukraine, to help the Disaster Emergency Committee, to help Médecins Sans Frontières and the Austrian Red Cross. And I can only recommend to everybody, please, to go to that website and see whether you might be interested in helping out and at the same time getting a wonderful piece of art. Anyway, Thaddeus, I don't hope I haven't embarrassed you too much. So I now hand you over to the capable hands of Jacob, who's going to be conducting the interview. All yours, Jacob.
Thank you, Louis. So Thaddeus, I had the pleasure of getting to know you in my offices about a month ago, And I was extremely inspired by, you know, your story. And I think it's going to be a very quick hour. But if you can tell the viewers, and today's going to be, of course, recorded, you know, your story of how you got into the art world, which I think is extremely inspiring.
Well, thank you first for inviting me on this. I feel really honored, and it gives me a lot of joy. Louis, thank you for your praise. I don't know if I can live up to it. Yes, well, this is in actually a whole lifetime, you know, that I'm spending already in the art world, and have the privilege to work with some of the greatest artists of our time. It's almost 40 years ago that I started my first gallery. Originally, I wanted to become an artist, and I tried hard. I went to Düsseldorf to, you know, the legendary academy Joseph Beuys had taught. You know, he became, you know, definitely the artist who influenced me the most at my beginning, but realized soon that I'm really missing the talent to be a great artist, you know, either painter or sculptor. And somehow I was just looking for something I could stay on in the art world, and see if I could work with an artist or work in a gallery or a museum. And when I couldn't find the real job, I just decided I will open my own gallery. Very naive, without any experience or knowledge. I didn't really study art because I wanted to study the practice of art. And so I didn't have a big background in art history. And 1982 was a legendary, very important year in the art world. It was the year of Documenta, which is a very big art show in Germany every 5 years, which a lot of attention is on it, where people really refocus or trying to see new artist careers are established. And in 1982 was also an exhibition in Berlin, which was called Zeitgeist, curated by Norman Rosenthal, the then director of the Royal Academy in London. And he invited the new generation of artists, and artists people haven't really seen before, like George Baselitz or Anselm Kiefer. And I was a very young man. I had the privilege that I had an internship with Joseph Beuys, the great German artist at the time, who made a very important ensemble, a sculpture for this exhibition. And the same year, as I said, was Documenta in Germany. So basically the art world moved from Berlin to Kassel, both cities which were hosting this big art worlds event. And I was there just helping out. You know, Beuys was planting his trees. He made this very big statement on ecology at the time. And I was just one of the planters, and, you know, schlepping the crates and helping unpacking, installing the art. And for me, it was this moment which kind of was almost, you know, changing my life, because I knew art will definitely be a very important part of my life. And when I realized that my friends back in Austria didn't really know some of these exciting new artists I met there, I decided just to go there and open a gallery, and without any experience of the job itself and what it means to work with artists, the responsibilities, or how to help build careers, or so everything came by learning by doing. And I was just very lucky to meet these incredible artists very early on, partly in their career or just at the point where their career was just moving to the next stage. You know, I had the privilege to meet Andy Warhol in New York, and through Andy Warhol I met Jean-Michel Basquiat. And you know, when I opened my gallery in Salzburg, my first one in 1983, when I was just 22 years old, I had 3 exhibitions with Basquiat in his lifetime. And you know, American art became something which really fascinated me from the very beginning. And I met some of the great artists from the pop-up generation, but also from minimal art, and then young artists like Keith Haring or Jean-Michel Basquiat. And on the other side, there was German painting. You know, after the war, there was a generation of German artists who became known. They, you know, did work which also dealt with, you know, the history of Germany, of the Second World War with the history of the Holocaust, artists like Anselm Kiefer and George Basitz, who directly addressed it, but also, of course, Joseph Beuys or Sigmar Bolke. And I was very fortunate to, meet this artist early on. There was nothing I could really bring in, nothing I could offer. Then my enthusiasm but somehow it started off a gallery in a rather sleepy town of Salzburg, which was great in opera and great in culture and had an academy Oskar Kokoschka had founded. And this kind of drew my attention to this city. I was not from there, but I decided to start there. And yeah, so the rest then was like a lot of hard work and growing and getting the trust of the artist and building it from there.
So again, in other words, you knew how to value art. You tried to be an artist yourself, and you were passionate about the art world. But you had to have had a knack for finding quality art when you opened your first gallery, right? In other words, at the end of the day, if you associate yourself with, you said, quality artists that you were connected with, so you must have, chosen the best early on. You must have had good taste, right?
Of course, in art you need an eye, but you can also learn. You can train you can acquire taste also. But you have to have a talent. I think it's a combination, I always say, between the talent of maybe recognizing art. This is important. Without it, I think you cannot succeed. And then I would say with very, very hard work, a lot of luck, because without luck, I think you cannot succeed. And the most important is to gain the trust of the artist. You build your career on the trust the artist put in yourself. And I think it's a combination of all of this, but a certain talent and a certain eye for quality, I think it's the base you can start building on a career in the art world. Yeah.
So tell us, for those that are less familiar, so if you're an artist, at the end of the day, you create value by selling your art to, it's not just about the highest price, but to quality people that enhance your art, right? So in order to sell art, you need to be shown in a gallery. So you opened a gallery, like how many artists are were in your first gallery, for example? And tell us through little details of that process, if you don't mind. Are there 10 different artists in one gallery? Is it one artist with 10 paintings? Describe that, please.
The art world is a kind of complexity which is not very simple, to really understand. But the artist is in the middle. The artist creates the artwork, and the more important an artist is, and the more talented he is, he has a chance to really make a career. And around this artist career, you have the gallery. The gallery is the one who brings in the public and is the bridge between the artist, who usually lives in his studio, works in, he works on his own, or he has a few assistants, but he concentrates on his work. So he needs somebody who brings in the audience. The audience is, on one side, the critics, the people who describe what the artist is doing. The audience is the curators who create a context by showing artists together from different movements. Then the museum directors who collect art and make it available for the public space, and maybe the most important part. Then you have the collector, the private collector, who does it from out of different motivations, by surrounding culture in your private atmosphere, in your private home. Some do it for investment, some do it for gifting, some do it for helping the artist. And all of these different elements have to really work very well together, that a career is built. So a gallery alone could not really push an artist. They can do it on the short term, because of course collectors trust the gallery and would go with something the gallery would recommend. But if the curators and the museum directors find what the gallery is presenting is not of a certain quality, everything is short-lived. You could at one point at the end of the day, the artist who will be part of the canon will be decided by the museums, because when the museum is acquiring a certain work of an artist, it becomes a certain importance. It becomes respect. It becomes part of a legacy and part of a canon. And all of these parts have to work really well together. And of course, the gallery itself is a very important place, because it's exactly the in-between of the artist studio and the artist as persona, and the way who explains, describes, opens the door, brings in the other partners. And this together creates value, but not value only in a commercial sense, but value in importance, in respect, and how an artist's career can blossom for many years. You know, an artist's career is not decided within one season or just very few years. It is decided over a long period of years. You know, an artist continuously has to reinvent themselves to stay relevant, because it is an incredible pressure, you know, today to create a career and to continue, you know, enhancing the career, to become part of a legacy. And but the gallery is very close by and tries to help as much as possible, you know, to try to avoid problems, to really take care of many things of infrastructure. And you know, often I say the gallery is also in the service industry, because we have to make sure that, you know, the artist can concentrate on his work, and to make sure that the right people recognize an artist, that curators visit the studio or be aware of what the artist continuously is doing. All of this is part of what the gallery is doing. And in the beginning, when a gallery is very small and starting, then usually you start, coming back to your question, with maybe 10 artists, and then you grow. And of course, a gallery continuously has to see where the artwork is going, continuously has to look into new artists, continuously have to involve new artists in the program. So a program is growing. That's exactly at the end why, for instance, in my case now, we are working with 65 artists, because we still work with the artists we worked for a long time, but continuously you introduce new artists to the program. And but usually it starts with a small group, and then over the years, you know, today, you know, in our case, we represent major estates, because some of the artists we had worked together during the lifetime, then, you know, we keep on working with the families, with the foundations, with the estate of an artist. So we work with artists who are barely 30 or 25 years old after they graduate, up to artists who are in their 80s, plus, of course, some major artists who we represent the estate. Yeah.
So I might be jumping some steps, but you also you do fund artists, right? A lot of artists are struggling financially early on, and they want to be into art. So when did you go from, you know, being 22 years, opening your first gallery successfully, to sort of funding the artists? Walk us through that process, please.
Of course, in my case, when I started the gallery, I didn't have the possibilities to really financially help artists, you know. So actually it felt like we were all in the same boat. We were growing together, you know. We were starting at one point, and the art world is also, it was very different back then in the 80s than it is today. It kind of became, I always say, it was like the ivory tower. It was a small, almost elite circle, and it was not easy to get into it. So you had to, everybody knew everyone. Cologne in Germany was a very important place. A lot of artists lived in Cologne and came out for Europe. Then Paris was always a big center for the art, but there were not so many. New York was just getting stronger and stronger in the 80s, but it was still a very small place where people could find their way. And I have really seen in this almost 40 years now move the artwork from the ivory tower to the center of life. You know, contemporary art back then was not something everybody was confronted with or was interested in. Today, you know, you have young people who, I remember when I was educated in school, art history was really ending with the turn of the century, but not this one, but the last one. So today, contemporary art is what people are interested in. I think our audience today wants to be with the artist of their time because it reflects their emotions, it reflects their views, it reflects what is going on around us, and this really changed dramatically. And so in a way, also in my case, I was very lucky to meet incredible artists when they were either very young or still in certain regions, like in Central Europe, not so known. And so I had the chance to work with them right away. And when I got more successful, I was able to take on newer artists, and then we were able to help them and to fund them to every artist in different parts of their career has different needs. A very young artist needs financial help, funding, to make sure that they get a great studio. And often, and it's still exactly today, it's very, very similar. Artists, when they graduate, they start in a very tiny studio. They hardly can move their canvases, and then you help them to get a bigger studio and to make sure that that they really can concentrate on their work, and that all this burden, might it be technical or financially, is something we have. Then you have the mid-career artist who need a very different support. They already have maybe enough financial security, but they really need a contact to certain museums. They want to grow from small institutions they were able to show to bigger institutions so that their work gets recognized. And then you have like the very successful artists who still need help, but on a very different level. So in each part of a career of an artist, a gallery is here to adapt to exactly the phase the artist is in and where we can feel that we are most helpful.
So would you say, I come from the venture capital private equity world, but would you say it's like a venture capital, meaning some of them, they're very early, you don't know if they'll be successful, not successful. So you're really giving them funding in order for them to develop, early on. And then there's probably some that are more established that you're really helping them grow. So I would say are you more in the venture capital, private equity, or you do more of both in the art world, would you say?
I don't know if you can compare it so easily. The art world, of course, today it became a huge industry. It became financially also very driven prices. Even very young artists, if they have a certain talent, can be successful very, very fast. It was very different in the 80s or even 90s. This changed in the last 10, 15 years, where there is so much demand. The demand is constantly growing, and the demand grows in people being interested in art. And as I said, they want to participate, they want to buy art out of different motivations. But not necessarily, the quality in artists are growing at the same pace. So the bigger the market gets, and if the pool of artists you can really look at is not necessarily growing at the same pace, then of course, the artist gets more and more demanded. And this is what we're seeing right now. And this is extraordinary. And we haven't seen this any time before. It has to do also that before everything was concentrated in Europe and in the US. And a European artist wanted to be successful and showing in America, and an American artist wanted to show in Europe. It was exactly this balance of these two big markets, but this was very limited, and it was almost ignorant towards Latin America, towards Asia. And only in the last 10, 15 years, we have seen that the art world became much more cosmopolitan, much more international. Female art role in 30, 40 years ago, they became very strong, because people recognized this was a mistake, by ignoring, incredible talents, but also we have an incredible market, not only to acquire art, but to produce art in Asia. across China, but also in Korea. Korea is an incredible country. And I have a gallery there now since 1 year, and I learn constantly about this country. And this is a rather small country in Asia compared to this, fast and big neighbors. And it had like a very important art scene back in the 60s and 70s, which was not noticed, not in Europe, not in America, which comes to light now. And so we're getting into a situation where the world becomes bigger and bigger. Information gets faster and faster, like in any other industry. So an interesting artist someplace in Africa or someplace in Asia gets recognized within a local community, gets shown in maybe the next, in a biennial, we have like dozens of biennial across the world, and those are places where art is shown in a context. That's the reason why curators play such an important role and are so crucial to an artist's career, because they create the context. They select artists, which galleries are providing the information, and put them in context with others and show, and then when you see artists and you can compare with others from different age, different background, or different content, which one are the more interesting ones? And everything goes much faster. Therefore, the reactions have to be much faster. Today, a career, in the 80s, it took maybe 10, 15, 20 years bis an artist has arrived in a mid-career. Today, this, and I don't know if this is a good thing, this can happen within very few years. If an artist is talented, within 2-3 years, he could have a world audience, because there is an incredible hunger for painting or for art, for culture. And so all the rules are rewritten as we speak almost, and COVID enhanced it, because, many things went into the net, and the net is even faster than any physical experience, which I still hope that the physical experience is something which will survive very strongly, because I feel in the power you have when you are confronted with a piece of art.
So I was wondering, in other words, when you started your first gallery in 1983 to today, there have been a lot of changes we can talk about. But what I was wondering is, in the old days, the artist, drew a painting, you brought it to the gallery, etc. Today, I would imagine, again, I don't know, that funders or people like yourself would go to the artist beforehand. In other words, do people pre-buy paintings before they come out because the artist has a track record? Or do people wait for the art to be, developed in order to buy it? That's where I'm going. Is there like a free market?
Yes. Well, there are very different markets. There are collectors or institutions also who are interested in artists who have already a certain track record. They're already known on basics. They have really shown already. They can already compare one exhibition versus the other. And more we have today market participants who take bigger risks. They want to see the freshest and newest talent right away. So sometimes one great, usually in a gallery, because this is what galleries do. Galleries pick up artists from degree shows. We just showed an artist in London. Her name is Rachel Jones, and we saw her work in a degree show of the Royal Academy in London. And my colleagues and mine, we went there, we saw it, we really loved the work, we felt the potential, and we immediately asked her to join the gallery. And she has, barely had 2-3 exhibitions and has already huge demand, because people recognize talent faster. But it has also the danger that many talent will be pushed into the market very early on, and some artists just burn out on it. Some artists don't have the strength to build a long career. Sometimes I say, if an artist barely being 30, they have to prove another 40 or 50 years of production, of every year doing new works, showing new works, being criticized being commented on, this is an enormous pressure. And, you know, to have one great idea and maybe make one successful show is something which is possible. And this is what we're all looking at and waiting for. But to build this on the long run, to really build on it, and, you know, we cannot imagine the pressure an artist has today to build a career over many years, and every show, the latest show is the one people judge you on, you know, because this is what is in our memory, the latest we see. So an artist can have done some great early shows. If they lose steam in between, this can be emotionally also difficult. And a gallery is also here to make sure that when we believe in an artist, you know, and to help them through this period when it can be difficult, because the market is also unforgiving, and the market is also driven by fashion, and we have to make sure that we balance this, and we don't allow that artists are taken advantage of, you know, by just be burned out. And the market, you know, can build careers but can also destroy careers, and galleries can definitely help to balance this out, and this is part of our responsibility and part of our job.
So I'm curious, and maybe it's changed over the last 40, 50 years, but how long would an artist's painting be in a gallery? What's a normal, you know, maybe it was 3 years or a year. Has it gotten shorter? Has the time changed? Meaning, do people acquire art quicker today than they did 30, 40 years ago? Do things move sooner? Or is it about the same pace?
No. They move much faster. This is what I just tried to describe before. Information is much faster. So in the 80s or 90s, you know, you had to send out, you know, slides, you know, or photographs, or you would print a catalog and send. We still do this, of course, but more for historical importance, you know, to archive, you know, different periods of artists. Back then, it was really to show the first time the artworks, you know, so people would receive a catalog and then they see something, and this is maybe months and weeks after the artist has done it. Today, communication is so fast. You know, an artist finish a painting, we photograph it, we put it on Instagram or in any social websites, or just on any press release, and information can be, you know, learned about around the globe within, you know, hours. So of course, this changed the whole behaving of buying art dramatically, and I think COVID put it on a new level now, because before people were taking information but still trying and aiming for trying to go to certain exhibitions to see the art and then to make decisions. But when COVID didn't allow this, people felt they still wanted to make decisions, and then the whole thing became a new speed in terms of how things get decided. And sometimes I find it's almost too much. I think so much is decided without having physically a contact with the art piece, and I hope we will get back to a certain balance of both, that at the end of the day, if you buy a book on Cézanne, or if you go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and stand in front of the sunflowers or any other painting, you know, this is the emotions you can get from being confronted with a great piece of art. And this can be an impressionist painting or a very, very contemporary painting by an unknown artist. It's really the relationship you build with a piece of art. I hope it will not totally disappear into the net, and but for some time it was very helpful to keep the art world really going on a very strong base.
So during COVID, you had, let's say, virtual galleries for that period of time. All of your art was shown on the internet, and you could go and see it that way and purchase. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes. You know, we already had a team installed in my London gallery who was technically trying to prepare us for, before COVID already, because we knew that somehow slowly this is what our audience demands, because even if you have galleries in London and Paris, which are frequently visited, people wanted more information and wanted this information also better prepared. And so we already had invested in a great team who was helping us to understand how to do virtual exhibition. So when COVID happened, we could really use this experience, upgrade it, invest even more, build this team even bigger, and have a whole variety of exhibitions, informations, using the tools we could use by presenting our artists, and it worked surprisingly well. Yeah? And I think we are back now to our physical exhibitions across our galleries, and at the same time we're using, our web presence in a different capacity. And I think this is one of the reasons the art world did not really suffer at all, or very little, through this COVID period, at least, with more established artist galleries. But also there was a lot of appetite and a lot of hunger for new art, and people would take risks. People would, there is an enormous interest in young artists, and there will be a lot of disappointments, obviously, because all these artists cannot live up to the expectations, but there will be also a totally new understanding of how to experience art. There's a new diversity which necessary to arrive, and it has arrived very strong, and it's here to stay. There are new forms of doing art, like NFTs, which we are watching carefully. We're not really very actively participating yet, because I think we will still have to really think about the quality of the art. At the moment, we're talking about the quality of a crypto existence, so that the work cannot be stolen, that it is also, that it exists in a total virtual space. We're doing everything to understand at the moment this new creative world before we will participate, but we already see that some of our artists have a strong interest in it, and then we have to support them in this. So I think everything is changing constantly, like in many other industries. So the art world is definitely not it's a very strong part, and also the speed is constantly changing. So you have to be very alert today, like in many other businesses, to stay really on the forefront of where the creative world is.
Right. So it sounds like you're very in touch with, you say you have over 60 artists, but you're very in touch with the creative side of the business. So you're really on the cusp of, where things are headed. So that gives you insight in sort of working with them, supporting them, planning for them, which I'm sure is unique. I wanted to know, for those who are less familiar, how many different styles of art are there, and do you specialize in, do you service all types of art, or do you specialize only in certain areas?
Well, creativity has no limit, and artists are always here to create new forms and of visuality which we can't even imagine, or we couldn't imagine before it was created. So there are many. So painting is maybe almost a very traditional way of looking at art, but painting is very demanded today. So there was a time in the 70s, curators would say painting is, all thing has been painted, and painting moved on to photography and installations, and we realized very soon that this was a big mistake even to think about it, because painting will never be finished, because every generation will create new painting, because there's the urge, but there's also the content. Content constantly changes. Emotions change. People are confronted today with different themes, different ideas, and artists will always be here to formulate this and put it into their creative language. It would be never really totally out of fashion, but other art forms might get stronger. So you have painting, you have sculpture, you have photography, you have video, which is a strong part of contemporary art. You have installations. You have a virtual reality, which artists are using and invite you to be part of it and to participate. So participation of an audience is becoming more and more important for artists to create. So all of this, a gallery has to really find their footing. They have to make sure they find something which creates a program which makes sense. You know, you cannot show everything. It's impossible. You have to make your choices, and by doing choices, you build a program, and then a gallery becomes a certain character because it reflects your taste. You know, if a gallery would try to cover everything, I think it would become something very uninteresting. But you try, you know, there are certain galleries who stay very strongly in one line. For instance, there's American minimal art, you know, Donald Judd and Flavin and some incredible artists, and we work with some of them. And some galleries show only one direction. They only show minimal art, and I have the fullest respect for it, you know, because it's maybe one of the art forms America really added to the 20th century, and it's a totally unique art form. And you can understand that the gallery would make this a program and say, we don't want to show expressionist paintings next to a minimal artist. But in many cases, especially when you talk about curators and museums, it is that you can offer a variety, that you can show what artists are doing today in the movement of minimal art, in the movement of expressionist figurative painting, as much as a museum tries, you know, to cover also different grounds. But still, at the end of the day, it has to have a certain character. Your choices have to make sense, and you have to be able to explain your choices. But you have a lot of choice, and this is the good thing. You can really, there's a huge pool, and you can pick the things you're interested in and work with the artist you really, you know, prefer.
Can you talk about you know, the primary market versus secondary market, because you're in both markets? Can you talk about the differences, please?
Yes, of course. So the primary market is galleries who work with artists directly. So they go to the studio, they follow an artist in their process, they select works, paintings, sculptures, photography in the studio together with the artist or together with the curator. Take this, make an exhibition, present it to the world. So they're really taking the works directly from the studio and place it with a collector, with an institution, with a museum. This is the primary market. So there's nothing in between. So the gallery is the one who does the choice and brings it to the audience.
Right.
These works have arrived in the first market. So the collector has acquired the piece of art. He can do with the piece of art what he wants. He can keep it, he can give it as a present to a child, you know, to the next generation. He can sell it, he can donate it to a museum. And as soon as it happens that an art piece moves from this first hand into the second, it creates a secondary market. Then you have the auction houses who come in because they are interested to get on art, because they would like to resell it and they want to participate in the value the art has developed or created or gained, or sometimes also lost, as an intermediary. And this is what the secondary market is. And the secondary market is all art which comes back to the market and finds another additional home. So it goes from a private collector through an auction house into a museum or into another private collection, or it comes from a private collector back to the gallery. This happens often. So often collectors who had acquired work many years ago come back to the gallery and ask the gallery to resell the piece of art, and this creates a secondary market. And this can happen 20 years, it can happen 5 years after they acquired, but also 20 or 40 years. And you know, sometimes when, you know, recently we sold a very important Basquiat painting in the early 80s, and it stayed in the same collection for almost 40 years, and it just recently came back to the market. And for us, it was like, you know, for me, it was very emotional to see this painting back in the gallery. After so many years, it was in this one private collection. I had sold it, you know, and when they bought it in the 80s, they just believed in the artist I had presented. I'd never heard of this artist before. And it came back as a masterpiece into the market now. So this is the secondary market versus the first primary.
Okay. Now you also are an advisor to you know, wealthy individuals that are creating their own art, right? So they want to have their own art either in their home or their offices, and you also advise museums. So can you talk a little bit about your role with both of those and how that kind of works with the gallery and the artist?
Yeah, I think what you mean is art for private foundations. So art,
yes.
So collectors who, yeah, of course, there are collectors who buy art because they want to live with art and they have it in their homes. And at a certain point, maybe you have more art than you can hang, and then you really start to collect. Then it's the urge to create a collection and to, because it's not something which decorates your home, or because some collectors stop when the walls are full, but the real collector cannot stop. They go on, and then, you know, often there are the means, there are the possibilities to create a foundation, and they come often to galleries and ask them for advice and to help to, and you know, this is a great privilege also to work with incredible collectors and help them build their foundations. And we were involved over these many years in many new foundations across the globe, who at the moment we're working more in Asia because there is an incredible urge, you know, for new museums, for private foundations, for private museums. But we have done this for many years. And to advise museums is more like to help museums to work on major exhibitions. You know, the gallery often knows where the works are. So when the museum would like to do an interesting survey show or a retrospective of an artist, they would come to the gallery who represents the artist, because the curator would like to get an overview. They go into the archive. They want to know where all these paintings are, and often galleries are the one in between by helping to secure the paintings, trying to find sponsors, trying to get involved financially. But basically, you know, the museum knows exactly what they're doing. They don't need the advice to do their show. They have their amazing curators, but galleries are here to help getting the artworks, knowing where they are, finding them, asking the collectors, bring them into the project, secure the work, and this is what galleries have to do. It's part of the responsibility towards the artist, but also towards the institution, and be the in-between of making great projects possible.
So is there anything in the art world, you know, you've had a over 40-year track record, is there anything in the art world that you'd like to see different or changed, or a perspective that you might want to share with the group today, you know, going forward? Is there something about the art world that is not perfect that you would like to change?
I think many things are not perfect, and we constantly try to readjust, you know, to it. Or, you know, when I compare the earlier days, like the ivory tower I described of the 70s or 80s, to what's happening today, back then things took more time, and by reflecting longer, maybe it has a certain quality. By understanding it better, getting more into depth. The speed we have developed is exciting because it's passion, it's involvement, it brings in new people, but it also can be, you know, it can go in to be adjusted and corrected. And, you know, the way things go today, time is such a factor, and decision has to be made so fast that there is the danger that you make wrong decisions, you know, that you advise the artist in a direction which is maybe not healthy. And at the end of the day, artists are kind of suffering out of this, you know. Sometimes you ask the artist too much in too short of a period, you know.
Right.
Galleries are also constantly want to create new exhibitions. And sometimes, you know, it would be better the artist would have a bit more time, you know. He wouldn't be pushed to go from one deadline to the next one. And the market is such a monster today,
Right.
constantly needs needed.
The demand.
And it would be better if we, in our responsibility, would kind of try to soften this a bit. And I think there's definitely room for improvement, because it is very tempting, especially when an artist is very demanded, to get more pieces out of the studio, to show more, to sell obviously more. And it's sometimes to the disadvantage of the artist, because maybe the quality might suffer. So there's builds which could be adjusted, and we should really take things seriously.
What's a realistic number or the timing to develop for an artist to develop a full piece? Is there a time frame? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it 9 months? Is it a year? Like, what's a realistic time frame?
Well, there is absolutely no rule which kind of can be put on everyone. One artist needs, you know, we work with very different types of artists, you know. Some need a lot of time to create and to do exhibitions, and other artists are doing it on a much faster pace. So there is definitely no rule. I think you really have everything. There's certain artists who needs really time to create, and they just ignoring deadlines. They just, when they're not ready, they're not ready, and the gallery has to adjust. So they have to change the time of the show. But out of my experience, usually artists can seriously do 1 to 2 commercial shows a year, and then you still have the institutional shows. This is maybe a kind of middle way, but then you have in both directions, you know, different developments. But I would say, you know, we work with some incredible painters, and they would do 1 commercial show a year, and you know, they would do 1 in Europe, and the year after would do 1 in the US. Then you have Asia in between, and then there are artists who can do 3 shows. But this is the exception, you know. I think artists who really produce so much that they can make several shows, we don't have so many. So I think the middle way, I would say, out of my experience, when I think of the artists we work with, they would do 1 serious show with new works a year.
Got it. So talk about, it's very impressive. So the American Friends of Israeli Museum, can you talk a little bit about how you got involved, how you created that process, you know, through the Holocaust, and your connection to Israel, please?
You know, being Austrian, you know, has an incredible burden. You know, what happened, you know, I was born in the early 1960, and into a period where, you know, the whole memory of the Holocaust was so present, and it was still so, you know, today it's, we're kind of a few generations after, and there's a different way to look at it. There's a more open approach to it. It was still, I think the shock was still so strong, and I remember very well when I was very young, 12 or 13 years old, and I learned the first time in school about what happened. You know, the way it kind of, you know, the emotion I had, and the irritation I had, and, you know, and the questions I had which nobody could answer, created, of course, a very special relationship to Israel and to the Jewish people. And I remember very well when I went the first time to Israel, it was in an exchange program. And I remember how much I was shaking when I showed my Austrian passport at the border entry. And so in a way, I developed a relationship which was very strong very emotional. I got first involved with the Austrian Friends of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And when I visited, in one of my many visits to Israel in 2010, I went to the Austrian Friends of the Yad Vashem to Jerusalem, and I met James Snyder. James Snyder was at the time director of the Israel Museum. And for me, it was an incredible meeting. You know, James became a great friend. And when I realized that there was no Austrian support group for the Israel Museum, I just offered, being Austrian and not Jewish, you know, if I could help. And James was very welcoming. He felt this is a great idea. He really trusted me. And so I think we are now in our 11th year of the Austrian Friend. We feel very embraced by the international community of the Israel Museum. And what we do is we're doing one major fundraiser. It's what Luis described, which is usually end of July, where we try really to, you know, make fundraising for the museum, but also more than that, just to really build a bridge. So I think the Austrian Friends are getting larger as a group. You know, we have a group in Salzburg, we have a group in Vienna. You know, we travel to Israel to see the Israel Museum, to visit the museum, meet the curators. We feel very connected with the Israel Museum. And for me, it's something which I really enjoy doing. And I'm still involved with the Austrian Friends of Yad Vashem, but Yad Vashem is so important, you know, because it is the memory of what happened in Germany and Austria 80 years ago. What I found so strong at the Israel Museum, it is so forward-looking. Its culture, it's something which unites people from everywhere, and it's a wonderful organization, the Israel Museum, and I feel very privileged and fortunate to be part of it. And I just love our activity, which we could develop out of Austria, and how embraced we are. And you know, and coming from Germany or Austria, it is very delicate also, because we cannot change our past, we cannot change our history. We can only feel the responsibility and keep the memory awake, but also look forward. And I think this is where I feel all my colleagues in the Israel Museums are incredible, helpful, and you know, we are very happy to be part of it.
Well, thank you so much for doing that. Louis,
Yes.
is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to bring up today, please?
Well, I think we should quickly mention a little bit about the Ukraine and art and what Thaddeus is doing, because I think it's a very apropos situation right now.
Agree. Thaddeus, do you want to talk about that?
It is incredible what's happening in the Ukraine. You know, a war has arrived in Europe, which we could have not imagined a couple of weeks ago that this could ever happen again. It reminds us of the darkest hours of what happened in Europe. And we're just sitting here and we are shocked and speechless, and there is not much we can do, but what we can do, we should do. And I think there's so much initiative everywhere, you know, to help these people. And we are just doing a very small token. You know, I spoke to some of our artists and asked, you know, if we should just start a fundraiser, getting the artworks. We identified 3 organizations, one in London, one out of Paris, and one out of Austria, who are really there in the Ukraine to help immediately, because I think this is what is needed. And I have to say, our artists, they embrace this initiative wholeheartedly. And so since Friday, we upload continuously. We only have, I think, 10 or 12 artworks at the moment, but tomorrow there will be new works, because this is all in the making, you know, as this was happening only a few weeks ago. We are starting to adapt and to be as fast as possible. So we are putting artworks in all our galleries in London, in Paris, in Salzburg, in Seoul, on the wall, but also on the net. And 100% of the proceeds are going directly, you know, to these 3 organizations to help, you know, wherever they can. And you know, when I see what Anthony Gormley, the great English sculptor, gave us, the sculpture is incredible. And we only started on Friday, and we already raised quite some funds. We really hope we will be successful with it. It is a small token, but I think it's just necessary and important.
That's great you're doing that, Thaddeus. Thank you. Thaddeus, is there anything you wanted to cover today that we left out on our first Zoom together? Anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I think we covered many grounds, and I really want to thank you for inviting me. You know, I really enjoyed this, and I think, you know, we covered, or at least out of my view. And of course, we could continue this. There would be many things to add, but I think we covered good ground. Yeah.
So hopefully you'll be in touch when you're in the States after October. We have our new building up, and we'll get you in the synagogue for either a Friday night dinner, or we'll find a weeknight occasion where we can do some in-person meeting. But
Okay.
really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much, Louis, for the introduction. And Thaddeus, keep up the great work for Israel and helping Ukraine. And it was a really great honor to have you on today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.